Today we are going to read from my Treasury of Fairy Tales, our next story in the series, which is The Princess and the Pea by Hans Christian Andersen. A long time ago, in a land far away, there lived a king and queen who had just one son. The prince was grown up, and it was time for him to marry a princess. And she must be a real princess, the prince told the king and queen. But there were no princesses in the land where he lived, so the king and queen arranged for the prince to travel to strange and distant lands to find a bride. There's his house, that's where he grew up. And this is the prince leaving home on his way to go and find a bride. The prince travelled north through the frozen lands until he came to a castle where a princess lived. This princess was tall and fair, with skin as soft as a peach. But when she laughed, she sounded like a braying donkey. And though she was clever, she was also vain and boastful. "Not only am I exquisitely beautiful," she told the prince, "but I can name every capital city of every country in the world, and I can speak 24 languages. You'll never meet anyone as clever as me." A real princess would never be so boastful, thought the prince. "I can't marry her." There's the prince getting back on his horse and going back into the winter to go and find his princess, because this princess was very boastful. She talked about herself a lot. He didn't want to marry someone like that. So the prince travelled south through hot, sandy deserts until he came to a palace where a princess lived. Can you see? He's crossing the desert here, the very hot sunshine. This princess had long gleaming hair the colour of midnight and skin that smelled of sweet almonds. She also had the most enormous feet. But though she was very beautiful, the princess would not speak to the prince. She would not even smile at him. She held her pretty nose high in the air. A real princess would never be so proud, thought the prince. I can't marry her. That's the princess being very naughty. She's ignoring him. She thinks she's better than him, so she's just looking away. It's not very nice, is it? And so the disappointed prince travelled east through the misty lands and over swept mountains until he came to a mansion where a princess lived. There he is, through the rain and the sleet and the snow, looking for his princess. So he's found a mansion. This princess was small and neat, with rippling red hair. She had a charming smile and a lovely voice, but she told the most shocking lies. "Last night I ate a whole elephant for dinner," she told the prince. "It was as big as this room." "Really?" said the prince. "How amazing." A real princess would never tell such shocking lies, thought the prince. I can't marry her. Another princess. This time she was a liar. I don't want to marry a liar. A year had passed when the prince returned home from his travels, weary, sad and lonely. Oh dear, look. He's greeted by his pet dog, though, who looks very happy to see him. "I'll just have to remain a bachelor," he told the king and queen. One evening, not long after the prince had come home, a terrible storm blew in from the west. Outside the window, lightning flashed and thunder rumbled and rain washed down in the streets. Inside the palace, the prince sat with the king and queen by the fireside, listening to the storm. Suddenly, there was a knock at the castle door. The king was so surprised that he went to answer it himself. Look, they were all sat there nice and warm by the fire when the door knocked. There, standing in the windy doorway, was the most bedraggled young woman the king had ever seen. Water ran down her hair and face, and her clothes were sopping wet and muddy. Water ran in through the toes of her shoes and out again through her heels. "Good evening, your majesty," she said to the king, curtsying politely. "I am a princess and I need shelter for the night. May I please come in?" The king could hardly believe that this soggy, sorry-looking creature was a princess, but he invited her in anyway. "Of course," he said. "Please come in out of the storm. We will gladly give you shelter for the night." So there's the house with the storm hitting the house. It's all outside. And there's the princess who's turned up to ask for help because she's very wet. And she's leaving puddles all over the floor. She's so wet. When the king told the prince that a princess had turned up at the door, the prince was very eager to meet her, but the queen told him he would have to wait. "The princess said that she couldn't possibly meet you wet and bedraggled," the queen explained. "She has gone to have a bath and change into some dry clothes." "That's a good sign," said the prince. "But how can we be certain that she's a real princess?" "I have an idea," said the mother. "Just leave everything to me." Off went the queen to the kitchen. She asked the cook for a single tiny dried pea. There's the princess having a nice bath, and the maids pouring in hot water for her. And there we go. Look, the queen has asked for a pea, a single dried pea. I wonder what she's going to do with this pea. A short while later, the princess arrived in the main hall dressed in the queen's clothes. Her hair shone, her cheeks were rosy, and her eyes sparkled merrily to match her smile. She certainly looked like a real princess. The prince and princess sat beside the fire and talked for hours. The princess was clever, charming, and seemed honest. The prince was enchanted, but he still wasn't sure that the princess was a real princess. There she is, dressed in the queen's clothes. And there they are, talking for hours and hours by the fire, so she could become warm and dry again. Meanwhile, the queen went to the best guest bedroom, carrying a single tiny dried pea. In the bedroom, she put the pea under the bed mattress. Then she asked a servant to bring another mattress to put on top of the first, and then another mattress, and another, and another. At last, there were 20 mattresses on the bed. But even that wasn't enough. The queen told the servant to put 20 soft, cosy quilts on top of the 20 mattresses. Then she had a ladder bought for the princess. I wonder what the queen is up to. There's the maids and the servants bringing the ladder so that they could put it up against the bed. And there's the queen getting them to bring in all of these mattresses and quilts. As soon as the queen was satisfied that the bed was ready, she showed the sleepy princess to her room. The princess was surprised when the queen brought her to the bedroom with its towering bed and tall ladder, but she didn't protest or complain. She thanked the queen and wished her a good night. The princess climbed the ladder to the very top of the pile of mattresses and quilts. Sighing contentedly, she settled down to sleep. But the princess did not sleep a wink. She tossed and turned all night. Look at all those mattresses and quilts that she had to climb up just to get to where she was going. And look at the princess. She feels all snug. She looks snug in bed anyway. And the queen's watching her, pretending to sleep. But she can't sleep. I wonder why she can't sleep. Why do you think she can't sleep? By morning, the princess felt tired and weary. When she came down to breakfast, the prince, the king, and the queen greeted her eagerly. "Did you sleep well?" asked the queen. "I'm afraid not," sighed the princess. "There was something small and hard in the bed, and no matter which way I tossed and turned, I still felt it. I'm dreadfully tired, for I hardly slept at all." Well, there's the poor princess, not very awake she's feeling, because she's had a small, tiny, lumpy thing under her quilt. "I'm so sorry," said the queen, "but I'm delighted too, for this proves that you are indeed a real princess. Only a real princess would feel a tiny pea under 20 mattresses and 20 quilts." Look at the prince and the princess. And the king and queen, they're very happy she passed the test. Because you see, poor people would have been sleeping on hay, or they'd have been sleeping on other hard things. They wouldn't have even noticed there was a pea. But a princess who's used to sleeping in complete luxury, she would never have had a pea in her bed. So that's how the queen tested her. The prince was overjoyed, for he had already fallen in love with the princess, and she had fallen in love with him. And so they were married, and they had a splendid wedding, and they invited all the royal families of all the kingdoms the prince had visited. And what happened to the pea? It was put on a velvet cushion in a glass case and sent to the museum, where it is still on display to this very day. There's the pea that made sure she was a real princess, and that's them getting married on their happy day. The end. And in our next story, we're going to be reading Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. So come back soon and I'll read you your next story. Mwah. Mwah.